All right, so welcome everyone. This is my next video for Module 3A, which is going to be reviewing and supplementing Chapter 6 of your textbook. And in this particular video, I'm going to talk about mnemonic devices. Okay, so what are mnemonics or mnemonic devices? A mnemonic is basically any learning technique that aids in the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information in human memory. Right? So I'm sure all of you can think back on particular mnemonic devices that you learned even as early as elementary school. Right? So I think of, for example, every good boy does fine for learning the notes on a scale, and also things like PEMDAS or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for remembering the order of operations, right? So really regardless of the particular discipline or topic that you're talking about, there are effective mnemonic devices, right? But our definition of what a mnemonic is kind of broad. So what I'm going to talk about in this video are what are the properties of the most effective mnemonic devices, and also what are some examples of some of the most effective mnemonic devices. So the best mnemonic devices are really going to have one or even all three of these properties. So as you guys saw in the textbook, one of the best strategies you can utilize to promote encoding of information into long-term memory is to incorporate mental imagery, right? So you saw in several different experiments, one experiment compared performance when you're simply rehearsing words, right, in your like you would for short-term or working memory. So you're rehearsing word pairs versus generating a mental image that incorporates both of the words in the pair. Your memory is going to be better later on for or people who generated the mental image did much better on a later memory test than people who engaged in just sort of that natural verbal learning or verbal rehearsal strategy, right? So anytime that we can incorporate mental imagery, that's going to result in better encoding into long-term memory. So that's one of the core features of the most effective mnemonic devices is incorporating some form of mental imagery or conjuring up some kind of mental image, and usually the wackier or more unusual the mental image, the better. One of the core properties of an effective mnemonic device is that it's going to allow you to actively associate new information that's with information that's already stored in your long-term memory, right? So it's going to allow you to connect whatever you're trying to learn with information you already know. And just like we saw in my discussion of the benefits of retrieval practice, right? It makes sense that mnemonic devices are going to be more effective when you come up with them yourself rather than simply being handed a mnemonic device. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to go through the two mnemonic devices that you guys watched in the videos. So the first one is a method called, or a mnemonic called the method of loci. So the method of loci actually generated with the, originated with the ancient Greeks who were looking for ways to basically maintain an oral history. Rather than having to rely on handwritten records, which weren't common in that particular age. So they had to commit large amounts of information to memory if they wanted to pass down that information through generations. And the method of loci is a very, very effective strategy, again, regardless of the type of material that you're trying to learn. And in fact, this is a technique that a lot of medical students use when they're going through medical school and they have to learn, for example, chemical formulas and very complex things like that for psychopharmacology and so forth. And it's also something that memory athletes use extensively. So I'm sure you guys read in the text about the people who compete in memory challenges, even at the international level, often have particular techniques that they use for superior encoding of information and retrieval of information, and this is one of those tried and true techniques. Right? So what you do with the method of loci is you think of a journey that you have taken many, many times. Right? So if there is a grocery store right across or a couple blocks down from your apartment, right, you would sort of mentally think about each location that you come to as you're walking from your apartment to that store, right? Or similarly, when we were all on campus, right, if you're a psychology major, you might, a journey that you might know well is the journey from your dorm room to Willett Science Center, right, our new psychology building. So if you wanted to use the method of loci, you would think about all of the stops or all of the locations that you would come to on your journey from your dorm room to the WSC. And as you come to each of those locations, or as you conjure them up in your mind, you should take a mental snapshot or a mental image that superimposes the particular item you're trying to learn onto the image of that particular location. Okay? So I have an example of how that might work here. And this is really handy for remembering something. Kind of the classic example that's used is remembering a recipe or a list of grocery items. Right? So imagine that you live in this apartment, and this is kind of a rendering of the floor plan, right? So you have your bedroom, and then you live with two other roommates. So what you would do is you would look at your recipe, and the first item is 2 eggs, right? So you might imagine the first location on your journey as you come into your apartment is the bathroom, right? So you might imagine if you have a light fixture in your bathroom, right? Maybe a lamp, you might imagine 2 eggs dangling from the lamp, right? Or maybe you might imagine 2 eggs sitting in your soap dish, right? And that's the mental image that you conjure up. And then next you come to your first roommate's bedroom, right? And so your second item is 2 cups of sugar, right? So maybe your roommate likes to swim, and you imagine him going for a swim in 2 very large cups of sugar. Or maybe he engages in a lot of weightlifting. Maybe he's an athlete, right? So you imagine him sitting on his weight bench, and instead of lifting weights, he's lifting up 2 very large, heavy cups of sugar, right? And then the third item on your list is a cup of milk. So maybe your second roommate, you imagine him with a big milk mustache. And so on. Maybe you imagine your living room sofa is a giant stick of butter, and maybe that your doorknob as you walk out of your apartment is a salt shaker instead of a doorknob, and so on, right? So again, the idea is you're using very sort of wacky, unusual mental images and those images allow you to make an association between the items on your list and a particular well-known location, right? So right away, we've got all three of our requirements for an effective mnemonic device checked off, right? You have generated this mnemonic device yourself, or this memory aid yourself, based on your experiences living in that apartment. You have created a mental image, and you have also, in that mental image creation, you have associated the new items in the recipe with existing knowledge about that particular location. Okay. My last example of an effective mnemonic device is the peg word mnemonic, right? So with this particular mnemonic, you have two pegs, right, as they're called, and those pegs are basically going to provide a scaffold or a structure on which you can associate the new information you're trying to learn, right? So the first peg is just a list of numbers, which hopefully all of us, even before entering preschool, we know how to count to 10, right? So that's something that is very, very well learned and very accessible to us without any additional studying or that we have to do. So we start, peg 1 is just numbers from 1 to 10. Peg 2 is a rhyming word, right? So there is some encoding or active studying that we have to do, but not much, right? Because rhyming, again, is going to take advantage of that existing scaffold or peg that we have. So in no time at all, we can learn 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, 4 is a door, etc. So those are our two pegs on which we are going to hang, if you will, the new information, right? So as you guys saw in the video, if we're trying to learn lamp, we can imagine a lamp heating a bun. If we're trying to remember the word, I forget what the word in the video was, but if we're trying to remember fire for number 3 and 3 is a tree, we'd imagine the tree on fire, etc. So again, it includes all of the components here because we have information that's already associated, or that's already in our long-term memory being associated with new information. We have mental imagery because we're coming up with these images, and again, it's self-generated because we're creating the images ourselves. Okay, so this was just meant to be kind of a short video talking about some of the most effective mnemonic devices and why they are effective. Okay, all right, so I'll see you guys in my next video.